So my name is Jason Waterman. I'm CTO at Momentum. How many here have heard of or used Momentum? I think there's a few users that I've talked to in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through kind of how we started, kind of how we got to where we are, a little bit about technical challenges, then a little bit around sort of the business side. I'm going to do a demo for those that haven't seen Momentum or haven't had a chance to see Momentum Plus, which you can only see if you actually subscribe to it. But and then just a Q&A session. So how did it start? So who here has found a gap in the market for a product that you wish was out there and either thought about it, built it, tried it out, did that? So I see a few hands. Like basically there's always an opportunity, like, everybody's unique, and coming up with, ideas about, oh, this is what I want. So what happened is our founder, Levi, he basically had one of these, he wanted to scratch his own itch. He wanted a dashboard that could keep him inspired and focused, keep him fired up, and essentially help him get things done, surface some information about like what's happening from sort of the outside world. It was kind of more of this sort of visionary, long-term sort of big picture vision for something like, like some big, VR type thing like you'd see in, what was that? I should remember. The Tom Cruise one, where he's Minority Report. Yeah, sorry. Kind of like that event, like sort of long-term vision, and it's like short-term, how do I execute that in something that I see every day with technology that's current? So basically, he was inspired to do that, and he basically built it to sort of meet his own need. So how did this first take off? So he put it in the Chrome store in October 2013, and not much happened. Then he basically went out and was a regular user on the productivity subreddit and saw somebody say, what kind of productivity tools do you use? And he put a reply up, and he said, I built a dashboard, homepage replacement called Momentum with a friend to inspire me and keep me focused through the day as a daily goal, to-do list, inspirational quote and photo, blah, 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 and please send me your feedback. So basically, he put it out there, just a little comment out there, and then this happened. So basically, the post came out in early November, I think it was November 2nd, and basically up from there, within a month, there was over 100,000 users, 18 million page views, and 5 million sessions. So that was the only thing he did to get it out there. This thing that he built, not with the intent of selling it, he just scratched his own itch and made it happen. Then after that, got picked up by various tech publications on the web saying, hey, this new thing is here, and it continued to grow. Then some larger productivity apps started talking about it. So Zapier, I don't know if anybody knows that. That's sort of integrating third-party services. So they wrote a blog post from 0 to 100,000 users in 4 months. They published that in February 2014. So it was like a little bit of a lift in press. And then from there, we saw steady organic growth through 2014. I didn't join actually until the end of 2014. It was one of these, because it was a side project, Levi just put it out there and he continued about doing his regular day-to-day life. And meanwhile, it grew and grew and grew over to, you see, this is weekly active users, so it grew up to probably 300,000. And that dip that you see at the end is a typical Christmas dip for a consumer product. Everybody just kind of buggers off at the end of the year. So I joined at the end of 2014, and when he realized this is something that is, got some traction, let's try to commercialize it and turn it into a product we could, become a business. So what we did, I joined, and the idea was, let's build out the back end, let's build some premium features into this that we can use to grow into a product that can, support the free user base. And sort of going forward through early 2014, does anybody know Tim Ferriss and Tim Ferriss podcast? So he had Matt Mullenweg, the founder of Automatic and WordPress, on his podcast, and they were just drinking tequila, talking about polyphasic sleep and all this stuff, and they got to talking about momentum for over 30 seconds on his podcast, which is huge. He's got millions and millions and millions and millions of followers who are quite fanatical. Like, they are like, what Tim Ferriss says is what you should do, and they do it, and it's usually right, and he's a great resource. So the two of them talked about it. They both used the product. That gave us a bit of a lift. It wasn't like a huge spike because we still had this growth, but it was a lift, and all these little bumps along the way as different, different podcasts, different podcasters, different bloggers, different, whatever along the way, they, kept talking about, what we're doing. And then from there, and so this is a little bit chronological, kind of what we were doing as we were sort of growing this product into where it is today. So growth hacking. So what we found is, like, everybody says, observe what your users are doing. Like, know your users. Like, what are they doing? So, and what we did is we observed that, and then we augmented what they were already doing. So we found that our users were taking the quotes that we had at the bottom of Momentum, and they were tweeting them out. So we thought, well, you know what? They like to share that content. So we basically took and built a quick feature to make it easier to do that. So right here, you see a little Twitter bird. So basically the quote, the source, so you hover. This stuff's kind of hidden because everything's kind of minimal in Momentum, so you kind of got to hover to get into the details, but you see the credit. Some of those things are new. The favorite and skip, those are different features that not everybody sees. Some of those are, the skip is a premium feature, but everybody sees the favorites. So the Twitter bird basically launches a Twitter intent. Basically pops open, you log into Twitter if you aren't already logged in, precomposes the tweet and who it came from. If they have a Twitter handle, it'll actually tag them. So we're actually helping to kind of build a bit bigger community for those quote sources that we have that are actually already active on Twitter. And from there, we started growing our followers by over 1,000 users a month, and now we're at 18.8 or 18,800 users or followers on Twitter. So that little thing was just simply like, what are the users doing? How can we augment that? And all of a sudden that became something that helped grow our exposure, because we get hundreds and hundreds of tweets a day with people tweeting our content with a mention of Momentum Dash on there. So there's lots of things you can do without spending money. If you've got users that are engaged and doing things, just take what they're doing and build it as part of your product. So building upon that, we find that people are actually taking screenshots and sending screenshots out of what their momentum looks like for the day, the photo, and maybe their focus for the day and things like that. So that's another piece that we're going to tackle at some point that I think might help that sort of growth hacking sort of angle. Lots of students use Momentum, and on Tumblr there's a sort of a section called Study Blur, I think, or something. I can't remember exactly, but there's thousands and thousands and thousands. Like, you just search Momentum on Tumblr and you get, like, it's just crazy. Like, people are sharing this sort of what they're doing. It's more like, here's my photo for the day and here's kind of what I'm doing in my studies, like studying for this econ exam or whatever it is. So it's just finding ways to take that. So that really helped.
So what was the relationship between the quote and the build out of the feature?
So, well, basically people were taking and like highlighting, like cutting and pasting that quote and then typing it into Twitter. So what we did is we just put the little Twitter bird icon on there and they click it and it pops up all pre-composed and ready to go and they just hit tweet, or they can edit it if they need to. So what we did is we just took what... Yeah, it's just like at momentum, via momentum dash at the end. So... Pardon me? Yeah, or if they're already logged in, it'll just, you know, it's just like any sort of thing, like share this content like you see on any news site. So basically we just use that mechanism, that Twitter intent sort of piece, and leverage that. So it was really good for our growth. Industry accolades. So we were approached by the Webby Awards saying, hey, you know, you should put your name in for the Webbies. You know, like, we like your product. Like, it was sort of a try to get in there. So basically, we didn't win an award for the Webbies, but we were an official honoree, which I think is pretty newsworthy. And then just so you see here, it's like, yeah, it's like, you know, best user experience. So there was lots of different categories, and I think the best user experience was like this year, or maybe the year before, I can't remember. It was like the Guardian UK. Like, I mean, it's pretty big time stuff that gets like big name awards here. But needless to say, like, we were like, we had gotten enough sort of exposure out there that they thought it fitting to say, hey, maybe you should put your name forward. So that's a start. So as we grow, maybe we'll be able to become like an award winner for that at some point. But anyway, there's like little things that happen, and then the organic growth continued through 2015. So that's basically beginning of 2015 through till kind of mid 2016. And yes, down in the left corner there, that is 3.3 billion page views. And yeah, like 5 million users. And so that's still organic growth through just people talking and sharing, people telling their friends about it. And you kind of, another thing I said is, I was going to point out is, what is that cliff over there? We didn't suddenly become irrelevant. What happened is Google Analytics shut us off because they give you 10 million sort of data points a month, and we were at 350 million. And they sent us like a notice like 3 weeks before that saying you need to get this down to that level. And we emailed them back and said, well, how do we pay, or how can we do this? And they never got back to us. So if anybody from Google ever listens to this, like, how do we give you money? We wanted to pay you, or at least see if it's a possibility that we could pay you to continue this service. So we ended up switching to a different product to do our analytics. We even downsampled to like 1%, but yeah, so they basically turned us off. So that's what that is. Monetization. So people ask us, well, you know, you're this free product that's in the Chrome store. How do you make money? And so, like, for the first while, the answer was, well, we don't. But we've got a product that grows, like, that's growing quite rapidly. So we are sort of putting our effort behind this to try to get it to a point where it can. And I mean, that's not entirely true. There was like little web search box in the sort of upper left corner, and we were using this Google custom search, so we could do a little bit of search revenue. So if somebody searched through there, Google would pay like, you know, a certain amount of money, and it was pretty minimal, but you know, with the scale we had, it was okay. But then they turned that off on us because you're not supposed to use Google custom search in an extension. But anyway, enough about Google. They make good phones anyway, and they do good search, but whatever. It's just hard to do business with them sometimes. So, so as far as monetization goes, other than that little bit of search revenue, we started to look at other things. Standard banner type advertising does not work in our product. If anybody's used our product, it's about everything about minimal UX. Just everything needs to be, you know, so a banner would just not have a place, and so we didn't even go there. So what we decided to do as the first step to monetization was a premium subscription model version of our product. So basically not taking anything away from the free product that people had grown to love. We decided, okay, let's take these new features and build them out through our paid premium version called Momentum Plus. And that was about two things. One of them was customization, and the other side was integration. So customization would allow people, people like to sort of customize their sort of environment. They want to have different fonts, different colors, possibly use their own quotes instead of our quotes, their own backgrounds instead of instead of the stock ones. So that was one side of it, and it cost money to deliver those features because we got cloud storage for images and bandwidth and things like that to deal with. So eventually we might expand some limited subset of that to the free product, but that's the idea, is that we sort of pioneer things in the paid version and then eventually drop it down to the free tier. So it kind of benefits the community as a whole as we grow. The other side was integrations. So part of our core product, and maybe a demo might have been a little bit relevant prior to doing this if you haven't used Momentum, but I'll get into that later. But one of the key features in Momentum was to-dos. So people they could do two things: manage their focus for the day, and they could manage to-dos, so tasks. So in the integration side, we thought, okay, well, if we integrate with third-party products like Wunderlist, Todoist, Google Tasks, we basically can feed in those task sources into your to-do list in Momentum. The other one that we support is now, that came out slightly after we launched, was Trello. So if you use Trello for project management, that can feed in as a source for to-dos. We have Asana, GitHub, Basecamp, others kind of in the works. So basically we're trying to cover sort of the high demand ones, and the consumer ones I thought were the ones, and when we thought as a team, were the ones to tackle first. So we did that, and now we're getting a whole lot of feedback from users. Like we have a feedback like suggested integration. We get like 5 or 6 suggestions for Asana a day, so that's our next big one. It's a pretty, it's got a good sort of free and low entry, sort of low barrier to entry price for sort of project management for groups. So that's kind of our first step into that space. So beyond that, in the future we have some plans for a team version. So extending what we're doing for the premium version for individual users, and we're going to have team collaboration features, shared visioning, change management around sort of like different messaging and communication for metrics that'll be useful for a team. And then moving on to enterprise, being a front end to existing SharePoint systems, ERP systems, CRM systems, just being a friendly front end to that intranet that nobody ever wants to look at. Right? So if we can be that friendly front end, and that can become a source for that whole curation process. We do generally know that people are tech savvy. Generally, we have a large user base of users at tech companies. So last I checked, we had over 5,000 users at Google, like over 1,000 at Uber, like over 1,000 at LinkedIn. Like all these big tech companies use us sort of individually. So there's a opportunity for this sort of ground up sort of model where we can get the teams to start self-organizing a little bit and without moving into this big enterprise sales sort of mode, where teams sort of self-organize like they did with Slack, and now eventually Slack is popular enough that they're starting to be sold at the sort of enterprise level, but they started with just individual small teams working together and collaborating. So yes, we're very much wondering about that, and we have a general idea through some of the tools we have, but we could do a better job as we start to grow to do that. And on the last stage, in the future on the free tier, since we have a paid product, we want to be able to start potentially monetizing on our free users, because they have a way to opt out. Like if they don't want to have some of these sort of traditional ways of being marketed to, they could pay a small price for the premium version and opt out of that. So it's things like search monetization, affiliate revenue. So we found that users, once again listening to our users, they tell us, I get inspired by this photo that I see every morning on Momentum, and I go in, I Google that destination and find out more about it. Well, we've prototyped out and we've been piloting a destinations page so that you can jump to staying within the Momentum set of properties, and explore. Like we're using Thailand for an example right now. So you see a Thailand photo, you click on it, and you go to various photos that wouldn't be necessarily good for a background, like street scenes and people and things like that. But it helps you give a bigger sense of what momentum is, what that destination is about through the momentum sort of experience. And from there, there's like book a flight here or buy the travel book here, things like that. It's pretty small, but because our user base is so big and they are already interested in this, that's a good avenue to just sort of leverage those sort of experiences into something that could, eventually become, a fairly big revenue source for us. So
3 billion.
Yeah.
At a half a cent.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're talking.
Yeah, I mean those are people that are clicking into it, but still, even then, I think the first time we launched the destinations page, I think less than 2% of our users would see a Thailand picture on a given day. And I think we booked like 20 flights in a week or something. I don't know. It was crazy. It was like, we didn't believe it. But the reporting, like the provider we were, like the travel search provider we were using didn't give us like sort of real-time access to reports. So that was just sort of an anecdotal thing, but it was much more surprising, like the uptake than we had thought. So
you set a goal, you want to take action on it.
Yeah. So roadmap. So kind of where we're going is getting onto the other browsers. Like everybody, Chrome has the biggest cross-platform user base of any of the browsers. So that was a sort of a natural fit. They also have a really good developer experience around building extensions. It's pretty straightforward, simple. You don't have to do anything weird to become a new tab extension. In Safari, in Firefox, you have to intercept people's calls and decide, are they opening a new tab, are they opening a new, are they clicking a link? And it's just a lot more complicated to do. So we just said, let's leave that alone. Let's build the core product in Chrome, get it sort of built out, and then we'll tackle those other ones. So that's the first step, getting onto basically all the major browsers. Mobile, people are saying, if I'm putting tasks into Momentum, tasks, or I'm looking at entering my focus, I want to be able to do that on my Android or iOS device. So, iOS sort of app with the ability to see your background, manage some of your tasks, but tying in now with iOS 10 now has a lot more rich widget development environment. So we see that being a lot more tied to Momentum. We can basically show your background image, your quote and things like that right on the Today screen. So that's going to work really well for us. Android's a lot more open, flexible. So we see almost like a lock screen replacement. So you can see Momentum being your home screen, so it matches what's on your browser every day and shows your focus or your quote of the day and that kind of thing. Web is another angle we're going to go. We basically went the extension route because you can install it and it becomes your new tab extension and it's seamless. It minimizes the friction. But a web version would be useful for those that just want to do it on another browser or just don't want to install it or whatever. So that's another piece on our roadmap. And then desktop. People have said, can you make my desktop background change to the Momentum background every day? Make your tasks available through the sort of menu bar in Mac OS. Same thing, Windows. So trying to find a native sort of experience that we can use on the desktop. A lot of people spend their day in the browser, so that is kind of the desktop of the modern day. But there is that group of people that wants to extend it a little bit further. So that's another area that we're going to potentially go with that. So the second part of this, from sort of Dario's sort of key sort of and sort of outline of what he wanted me to talk about here and what traditionally the speakers talk about. First is a bit about how we got to where we are. Now is a little bit about the tech side, like the tech challenges that we face, being as popular as we are. Biggest is scale. So our API serves 840 million requests a month. So that's just like a little breakdown of our server traffic per day. You can definitely see that cyclical weekday thing. Like people are really sort of gung-ho on Monday and they peter off by the end of the week. And so that was a challenge, especially with a small team to deal with. latency. So we're new tab extension. Somebody opens the extension, they want to see stuff right away. It can't take, there can't be a big delay. So handling that load with that low latency is a big technical challenge, especially for a small team. The other tech challenge we came across is a Chrome extension is like an app that you install. It's more like an app than a website. So like a website, you just push a new version and everybody gets the new version next time they refresh their page. For a Chrome extension, especially with a large deployed user base, it can take up to, I think it was like 4 days for everybody to receive an update. And there's also the potential for that step for approval. I think just because we have so many users, occasionally we'd get flagged and it would just be like, okay, it's on hold for approval. So it's a good thing because they're vetting things to a small degree anyway on the Chrome store. So we mitigated some of that sort of risk and inflexibility by building like a plugin sort of, or an add-in infrastructure. Much like, anybody use React Native in any projects here? React Native is like, the JavaScript sort of runtime you can build iOS and Android on. And there's a product called Code Push. So basically you can take and use Code Push to push hot fixes to your iOS or Android app. So we're doing very much the same sort of mechanism to sort of deploy changes between release cycles on our extension. So some key takeaways. So I think, like instead of getting into all the details, here's all the server stack and tech stack we use. Like what are the key takeaways that I learned from doing this? And it's very different from my previous work. I did a lot of work, doing web and API development, mobile development. But it was in an enterprise environment where you've got probably more complex business problems to solve. But very small user base, a few hundred or a few thousand users. In this case, it's a very, much sort of simpler business case for what the app does, but the complexity is in the scale. So the key takeaways I think would be useful. I read this somewhere as I was, prior to getting into this, like somebody said, and they were some big company. I can't remember. I wish I wrote it down, but I use it all the time. But choose the stack you know the best. Like, don't go with, well, I want to use Node.js because that's the coolest thing, or I want to use Ruby or whatever. Like, go with what you know the best, because at least to get to that MVP version of your product, like you need to have that minimum viable product before you can even build a business or a product out of it. So wasting your time on a tech stack you don't understand thoroughly, you're not going to get the product off the ground and it's not going to go anywhere. So if it's PHP, if it's .NET, if it's Python, whatever it is, just go with that unless you've got a whole lot of funding behind you and you can build out a team that can, that's a different sort of process. Like if you've got a small idea and you're growing it and bootstrapping it like we did, we basically said, I started to do some stuff in some new stack and I'm like, what, this is not gonna be productive. So let's just go and build it, and then we can always retool later. And with the sort of in this day and age, microservices, like everybody's, it's kind of a common term in sort of the API world. Different pieces of your application can be built using different tech stacks. So that was one thing that I sort of learned out of this. The other thing that I learned, pick a managed platform versus raw infrastructure. This is a hard thing for people that come from a tech background where, well, I can do that. I can spin up my Linux instances and I can do all that stuff. Well, you either do that or you spend dev time on building out the core value of your product. There's a lot of platform type services out there. Heroku, if you're building in Ruby or Node or Python, that's an amazing sort of super simple stack. You just deploy and it, even check it into source control and it'll pull down and build and deploy. So versus managing a whole bunch of Docker containers and virtual machines and all that sort of thing. Like, that's great later, but early on, focus on your time more on the dev side of DevOps than the ops side. So same thing with databases. Like if you can use Compose or like, you know, some sort of managed database. Compose lets you host like MySQL and Postgres and all those sort of things with just a turnkey. They manage it. So try that. It lets you focus on your dev side. Cache all the things. So for a large-scale application, we use Redis. You can use Memcached. Don't hit your database with requests when you've got, you know, millions and millions and millions of requests a day. There's stuff that just doesn't change, like user authentication. Like, what does this token map to? Like, find a way to cache it and keep it hot so that it, you know, you get this low latency sort of layer. It's a bit technical for some people, depending on what sort of part of that sort of mobile stack and dev stack you're in. But that's one thing that we found, and it worked really well for us. Solid, repeatable deployment like sort of strategies. So, like, you need to manage your source control well. You need to manage your releases so that you can know what you deployed when and what might have gone wrong if you deploy, because things can go really wrong, especially as you start to grow and you've got, you know, people relying on your product. You need to think about those things early. It doesn't need to be perfect, but there needs to be something in place. Next, sort of finance. That was sort of the third piece that, you know, how did you sort of finance your startup? So we're in a unique position where we got traction really early. So we kind of knew there was a product market fit for our, at least the free product anyway. So we were sort of we had a bit of a luxury over some people who have an idea that they're just trying to sort of get off the ground. Different decisions can be made, but as founders, we both felt that we'd like to move this forward without bringing on external funding, because what that does, if it was an existing product and we're doing something in a space that's established, it would be great because you get people that have some really good business experience coming in and looking at what other people did and saying, let's do it differently this way. But this is a greenfield thing. Like, this is brand new. Like, there was not really something of this type at the time. So we basically thought, you know, we want to be able to experiment a little bit and sort of see where we can take this without people traditionally going back and falling back to the sort of standard business models they might lump this into. So we basically said, okay, let's try this out for a certain period of time and see where we can go, see if we can get this to revenue. So we took the hard but more flexible route of bootstrapping. So it is hard because, you know, you don't know when the money's going to come. You're potentially spending money out of your bank account. You're possibly doing other consulting work or whatever. That's kind of what we did. We did sort of a transition over a few months to sort of go from sort of full-time consulting or doing work for other companies to gradually getting to doing more, you know, almost near full-time for Momentum. And like, people ask, you know, are we looking for financing? We're not actively seeking it, but if like the right partner that was, say, a VC or an angel that had skills beyond, you know, just bringing money to the table, we might consider that, because we're at the stage now where we just need to take something that's popular and make it into something that's going to become a really viable business. And we're sort of doing an okay job at that, but there's a whole lot of things we could execute on, and getting more money in would definitely make that happen faster and potentially avoid any potential, you know, misses we could sort of make in this whole process. So the next part is the demo. So I'll give a quick overview of what Momentum is. So this is sort of the core Momentum experience. We're actually looking at Momentum Plus, but it's not much different. Right here, so I mentioned, you know, beautiful photo, inspiring quote, place to enter your focus for the day. Let's see. You can manage links to various apps. You can jump to your default Chrome tab. There's a lot of people and that's something I think we might work on for baseline product fit for the free product is people say, well, my sort of quick links to my apps are gone. So we can get to it quickly through this or a hotkey, but then you can add other links that you go to regularly. To do managing tasks. So this is generally in our free version. There's just a single list, but in Momentum Plus we have Inbox Today and Done. We're going to sneak preview. We're going to offer Inbox Today and Done in Momentum Free, and offer custom lists in Momentum Paid. So you can do as many lists as you want, like work or project names or whatever. So that's that side of it. Basically, yeah, weather, search, if you want to do like a Google search. Can't monetize that anymore, but whatever. We started offering favorites, so we could start to get to know what kind of photos people are liking. Same thing with what quotes people like. We are just this week actually releasing a way for people to actually see what they've favorited, but it helps to kind of accumulate that, and then people can look back on it. So if they want, like, what photo did I favorite a while ago? Same thing, you can look at the history. That's something we're launching this week as well. So people can look back a couple of weeks on free. So it's like, what did I see last week? I love that one, and they can see a little thumbnail of it in there. And Momentum Plus users can go back to any image they've ever had. So that's one sort of key feature. So what we're trying to do is offer an experience that adds value to the free users, but if you want to sort of unlock a little bit more, that's where the paid sort of comes in. So it's like trigger events, like what can we do instead of trying to sell to somebody, what can we do to sell within the app in a way that's sort of user discovered, rather than trying to just inundate people with messages and advertisements. They discover, oh, well, I like that. I want to see that photo again. Oh, I can do that with Momentum Plus. And so they've already expressed that that's something they want to do because they tried to do it. So that's where we're trying to take this. So it becomes, because we've got this big fire hose of users coming in, brand new users coming in, we should use that rather than try to market to them in traditional ways. Over here, customizations. So I mentioned there's customization and integration. So I've got a custom color theme, but traditionally Momentum is like a dark theme. Switch to a light theme, or jump into your color picker and pick your own transparency and color that you like. So that's one thing. It's not huge, but there's lots of people who like to tweak that kind of thing. Fonts, like there's the classic Momentum font. Modern is like an Avenir. Startup is that. Like retro gives you like a little console type font. So kind of sort of express a little bit of personality in this, especially how people like to show it off and kind of tweet their screens and things, so they can do that. So to-dos. So this is I've got some stuff connected here for like Wunderlist integration, Todoist integration. So I'll just disconnect one of these and kind of show like the experience, like simple click, like here's the integrations we support. You click on it, you click connect, it pops up like an auth box. I'm already logged into Wunderlist and I've already authorized it, but it would be like log into Wunderlist and say, hey, Momentum wants to look at your tasks and do this, and you click OK, and you close it up, and it's now connected. And you jump over here, and I'm now connected to Wunderlist, and this shows all my Wunderlist lists that I've got set up over there. And so I can manage all my tasks on my Wunderlist mobile app, and they can feed in here, and I've just got a bunch of garbage data in here, but test data to show off. But you can use hotkeys too to jump between the lists, and then like shift left and right to jump between your providers. So like I've got Momentum, Wunderlist, Todoist, what are we? Google Tasks, Trello, different Trello boards. And then you can go and look at different lists on Trello. So that's kind of cool for like integrations. So, and when you check off something on here and it's Trello card, it'll actually move it to the next column. We're going to do a little bit more customization around that work, and like you can pick like an anchor column where the done box, like the done list will go. But and the other cool thing is this little option here is, we call it autofocus. So basically your focus, instead of typing it in, it just becomes the top item from whatever list you're on. And you move stuff around, and you know, you check it off here, and I won't do it on some of our production boards, but if I go to our test board, there we go. So, you know, and that's the whole idea, is that you don't want to be overwhelmed with too much information. You know, Trello is a great tool, but when you go over here and you look at like, you know, all this stuff, like what are we doing? You know, this whole list is available right in Trello, but I can focus on it, and we generally do like inbox, you know, what we're working on, that kind of stuff. So, and we can turn on and off like stuff that you're assigned to as well, so you're not seeing everything. So, yeah.
Sorry, I said Chrome, I meant Dragon from Komodo as like a dashboard.
Yeah, and so here's another thing to show here. If I jump over to, let me reload that just because it looks like my connection was messed up from not being connected to the right Wi-Fi. If I go over here and I'm now in the, let's go back to the to-do board. So it goes, you know, if you look at these map to the lists in Trello, to-do, doing, done on that test board. And I type this in, let's type in Momo, and jump over here to Trello. There's Momo. And if I go back over here, it's now my focus. I check that off. And I jump over here, and it's now moved over to the doing list. So it's like, so it's kind of following that Kanban flow that you'd normally do in Trello. We try to map, like there's other to-do providers that have like done states and things like that. Trello's a little bit of a different one because we're kind of fitting a round peg through a square hole.
Difficult programming to make extra apps like that?
It wasn't easy. No, Trello has a Trello has a fantastic API, and if they didn't have a really good API, it would have been very hard to execute something that sort of maps a linear thing to like a one-dimensional thing to a multi-dimensional piece here. Todoist, it's one of the more popular free to-do apps, and it's the hardest one because it doesn't have like a per list API. You actually have to download every task every time, and we have to process it and parse it, and that was actually harder. And so we've been talking with the Todoist team, and even the head engineer there said, yeah, our API isn't very good for third-party integrations. That was what they needed to do. It's more of a sync API, like you download it all, and then you can download any changes since a certain point in time. So basically they said, you should just cache all the tasks on your servers and filter it there, and then you can use, they have a really good webhook system for updates, like things that are changing. So we might end up doing that, but that's like a later down the road. It's actually kind of working unless somebody's got a huge number of lists. We're actually able to pull it into memory, process it, filter it out, and produce stuff in a pretty quick way.
That integration is something that your users are really into?
Yeah, it was a big one. Like our first request on user voice for our product when we started, we opened that up really early, was custom backgrounds. People wanted to do their own backgrounds. A lot of people think the best part of the product is that we have really good curated backgrounds, but some people want, you know, different things motivate different people. So we have actually since implemented that, but the first thing we implemented, the second most popular request was integrating with different to-do systems. So we did that. It was tough, but now that the baseline is done, each new integration is a little bit easier because we built out a framework to do it quite easily. You know, from a plumbing standpoint, like you got to kind of know the idiosyncrasies of that platform that you're integrating with. But yeah, there's like you know, like this is pulling live all the to-dos live through our servers, through their servers, and back to here, and it's working pretty responsively. So it's, if you have a huge to-do list, it's a different story. We've got some complaints, but we're working with those users that have big lists. Go ahead.
Is this the point of view of the premium version or the premium?
This is the premium version. So it looks pretty much the same, except you only have like a one-dimensional list, like you don't have multiple lists to pick from. You don't have autofocus, that sort of thing. But in general, the overall piece, another piece up in the corner here. So this is metrics integration. So that's another aspect of the integrations that we're starting to kind of build out. This is Fitbit, so that's steps today. So it just shows, whatever syncs from my phone up to whatever's on Fitbit. It pulls that up if I refresh.
That would be sweet if they pull out a business metrics.
Yeah, well it is. So this is unclaimed tickets in user voice. So if I jump over to user voice, that actually matches our number of unclaimed tickets over there real time. So Google Analytics, we have a beta of that until they pull their plug on analytics, then we just don't use it internally anymore. Use like Google Analytics, CRM numbers like sales to date or like new followers or whatever is relevant. And so the idea is we're going to start building these metrics. And the reason behind it is tied to the whole productivity side of things. If you go to Google Analytics to look up something, you're going to go down that rabbit hole and you're going to be like, where did those users come from? What was this? And it's like, you're going to waste your time versus subliminally sort of seeing it every tab load. Oh yeah, and this changes every tab load. It randomly picks a different metric. So you're sort of surfacing this data as you're doing your daily routine, and eventually we want to start doing tracking of trending. So is it noticeably up or noticeably down? And if it is, it'll prioritize that. It'll show you some way, like a little up arrow or down arrow. The idea is it's tough to bridge that. It's like people say, well, you should integrate with Slack and show how many Slack notifications. Well, Slack is not a productivity tool, it's a collaboration tool. And so there may be a way, like I think maybe the other way, like you could do things in Momentum and they would surface as a Slack bot and, do something like so-and-so checked off something or some sort of team-related feature, and it would surface itself in Slack, or you could send something to Momentum via Slack as a bot, make my to-do or my focus, send it through Slack and it'll pop it up there or whatever. So it's a tough call to bring in the social side because what we're trying to do is, pardon me?
It can almost be counterproductive.
Exactly. So there are ways, and we will eventually. It might be that we go the other way, like a bot on Facebook that says, well, let's pretend it doesn't say test for today, but say it was test for today. It's like, have you done test for today? And it pops up in Facebook when you're on there. The other way around, right? Like, so it knows what your focus is, so it's the other way around.
Your friends to have accountability for you.
Yeah, exactly. So there's things like that would tie into social in a better way. So those are bigger initiatives, and that's where we start talking about, well, okay, like, where do we go? And we could, if we took on funding, we could probably execute multiple things like this, multiple of these initiatives at the same time.